Zola Levitt Presents with Dr. Jeffrey Seif and Sandra Levitt. She shall be called woman.
I came forth from a man.
But I found favor with him.
Successful.
And
And
now-
true success is not measured in wealth and power, but in the estate
As
of
busy as
one's
I am,
heart.
I've never been happier and more
Ever
fulfilled.
hoped for. I raised him up strictly in the faith,
and
the
more.
law, and the prophets.
And now I want to give something back.
I believe Elohim meant it to be this way.
She's still a cornerstone of wisdom to the family.
But you
And as
are
I see
always
it-
in my heart.
For 3 years, the heavens were shut and refused to give rain. All because of this prophet. He met me at the city gate and asked me for a drink and some bread. But I had none to give, only a handful of flour and some oil. But he insisted, saying Yahweh would bless me with an abundance if only I would believe. I had planned on baking the last morsel of bread for my son and for me. We were ready to eat our last meal and die. My husband had passed away years before, and I had no means of support, especially in the time of famine. But in my most desperate hour, God made himself known as my provider.
Zodat ik u erin geberechtige, u smurf en u shalom adora.
His grace is sufficient for me.
Hearty shalom to all of you. Jeffrey Seif here with my friend Sandra Levitt.
Shalom. Welcome to Zola Levitt Presents. We're talking about widows today, Jeff, and that drama that we just saw is so touching for me, being a widow, watching this woman walk and just the weight of the world on her shoulders. She doesn't know that this prophet is Elijah. This is Elijah. This man made the rain stop.
It's a great story because God comes to her aid, but she is carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. What's that like?
Yeah, this was one of those programs that I really wanted to make, but I really walked into it very quietly because it's so raw for me at times. You always remember that you're a widow. Part of you is gone. Part of you is just gone. And I'm glad we made it because this widow is unnamed. And she's unnamed because we lose somebody all the time. And I think God comforts us, and that's what we need. We're going to Israel, Jeff, and teaching about the widow and Elijah. Back after this.
In the book of Malachim, Kings, Bible readers learn that King Ahab married poorly. He married Jezebel, a Sidonian princess. And by virtue of his marrying wrong, he brought untold miseries upon his world. Women were depressed, and why should they be happy? The men were miserable too. There was nothing to do. As a punishment, prosperity was driven out of the land. The water didn't water the earth. All there was round about was dust and dirt. No need make ready the instruments of harvest because there was nothing to be gleaned from the earth. And so it is, the men weren't working, the children weren't playing, and the women were miserable round about. Who would protect them? Who would change this abysmal state of affairs? Here's a shomerah, a tower, a watchtower, from the word shomer, where a watchman would be placed. What is this watchman going to look out for? Because in this case, the enemy isn't an army that would encroach upon his village. The enemy, or so it seemed, was God, who was withholding prosperity from his people. There's a vine that grew up against this tower once upon a time, but there's no leaves or grapes. And why is that? Because life, in effect, has ceased. People aren't eating and drinking. The animals aren't faring well either. This is a world gone bad. Eliyahu, Elijah the prophet, entered into this world. In fact, it was through his ministry that this world was brought about. Our story looks at Elijah's contact with a woman at the ragged edge of despair. Eliyahu was told to go to a village in Israel where they're right at the ragged edge of misery, and there he encounters a woman who's making ready for her Last Supper. No, this isn't Jesus in the Passover meal. This is a woman who Eliyahu encounters, and he says, "Give me a drink and fetch me something to eat." And her response is, "I'm about to die. This is my Last Supper." But the prophet says, "Listen, you're not going to die. Do something for me instead." And she takes part of her meager provisions. She gives it over to God, if you will. She gives it over to the prophet, the man of God, and her world is transformed in the process. This series looks at women. This program looks at widows. And we're going to see how in a world gone bad, God rises up and champions the cause of women who are hard-pressed amidst the turbulence of trying times. Every kitchen has a pantry. Here's the storage closet for this home, but unfortunately it's not very well kept. Why should it be? There's nothing in it. In fact, the vine that just protrudes from it here looks as dead can be. And that of itself bespeaks the nature of life here in northern Israel. Why? Because a drought has come. Well, so much for the bad news. People can start to look up a little bit roundabout. You know why? Because God has visited the city. In fact, the prophet Eliyahu came here. Amidst the turbulence of trying times, he engaged a woman. He wanted to radically transform her life. And what did he say? It was a strange saying indeed. A woman pressed to the edge of despair, preparing her Last Supper, in effect. The prophet shows up, and in chapter 17, there in verse 9, he says, "Hineh tziviti shomisha." He says, "I've commanded this woman, almano, widow, lekal kalecha, to sustain thee." The Lord says to the prophet, "Go to that place because there's a woman there. And the word to her is that she's going to take care of you." Seems rather odd. Here's a woman pushed to the brink. She has nothing for her own cupboard, and her meager food staples now are to be shared with the prophet. Well, what happens is Eliyahu comes to this woman, despairing as she is, and he has a word for her. We're told in verse 13, and again, I'm looking here at the 17th chapter, 1 Kings. Vayomer elecha Eliyahu al tiri, don't fear. And isn't that what happens sometimes? We see our security drying up. We're at the ragged edge, and the tendency is to fear. In fact, the senses roundabout say fear. There's no rain. There's no grain. The only thing that's growing roundabout is pain, and things aren't looking any better. But then God shows up. And when God shows up, things can begin to change up. We're told in the book Tehillim in the Psalms that he can take a desert and turn it into a garden, and that he can take a garden and turn it into a desert. Well, what happens here? The woman says, "Goodness, sir, I have nothing but these meager staples." And what does the prophet say? Take that and give part of that to God's service. And the net result will be that you will never run out. I love the way it reads as we go on in the text. In verse 16, well, what happens is the woman does that and observes a miracle. She makes a meal, gives some to the prophet, and gives and gives and gives, but the blessing keeps coming and coming and coming. What a great story, what a miracle. It's no wonder that Jews the world over sang, Eliyahu HaNavi, Eliyahu HaTishbi, this prophet who made a name for himself by helping distraught women. Oh, would it be that others within the sound of my voice would learn that God cares about the widow, God cares about the afflicted. Here, in fact, as this woman keeps giving, she keeps getting. In chapter 17, verse 16, we're told, Kad hakema, lo kolota, that the jar of meal, the food staple, was not spent. V'tzapachat hashemen lo choser, that the cruse of oil was not spent. And this, ki debar Adonai Rasher diber beyad Eliyahu, this according to the word of the Lord that was given through and to Elijah. And friends, that's a word, I believe, that's given to us through the scripture. That is, inasmuch as God cared about the widow who served him. Now, I want you to hear me on this. In a world where women are abandoned by men, a lot of people think, well, I'm the man, boy, I have all these women and all these kids. No, all that proves is that you're a male. Now, if you're a man, what that means is that you are going to take care of a woman. Notice, here's a woman who serves the Lord, in response to which the Lord looks out for her interests. While God does that miraculously, I don't doubt. A moral in the story is inasmuch as he does that to the woman that serves him, so too those of us that want to walk in God's footsteps, if you will, and follow his examples, we too are to be of service to the woman who's minded to be of service to us. It's for this reason, in part, when I go over to the New Testament, therein there's a book called Yaakov. Now you say, well, there's no book in the New Testament called Yaakov. That's only because you're not used to looking at the New Testament through Jewish eyes. And if you wonder why should you look at the New Testament through Jewish eyes, it's because Jesus was a Jew, all of his Talmidim, his disciples were Jews, and the story took place in Israel, the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people, where I am broadcasting from right now. Here, Yaakov, or James, writes, and he says in chapter 1, verse 27, he says that pure and true religion is to, among other things, visit widows and orphans in their affliction. Inasmuch as God does it, God would have those that follow in his footsteps to do it. And so it is we consider here the story of women in the world in general, but in particular, we want to underscore God's concern for women who are marginalized, depressed, and distraught. Let's get behind them and help them and abandon them no more.
Jeff, I love your teaching on the widows. You're right. People need to take care of widows, and that really helped me get through the first year was so hard, and yet people would come and they would say, are you okay? They would offer their sympathy, they would offer their ear to talk to me, which was really, really kind. We do need to not forget the widows. It was a good teaching.
Yes, I like to inculcate in my boys how important it is to support women. And what happens when when the male dies? I mean, she's put in a precarious place.
Well, and the scripture you used, James 1, was wonderful scripture. The other scripture I like is in Psalm, where it talks about God is a father to the fatherless and a helper to the widow. He says she's a judge of the widows. He takes care of his widows, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I believe that biblical faith is at its best when we're meeting the needs in the world.
But we even know that there's a need is really important. Also, sometimes people just, I know for me, I heard people say, well, I didn't call you because I didn't know if you were okay, or I didn't call because I didn't know if you were not taking calls. They were concerned about me, but I really appreciated the prayers, the letters, the calls. I really appreciated it.
There's a story we're going to look at in a moment with a woman who's much to be appreciated, Freda Lindsay.
Oh, she was terrific. I loved interviewing her.
She co-labored with her husband, and then she'll tell the story. He dies on the stage there after he just gets back from Israel. He's speaking to the student body at the college where they were, and the bottom drops out from underneath her.
He's been dead 34 years, and she is 93 years old, and is just a lovely, lovely woman. It was an encouragement for me, and I think it'll be an encouragement for everyone else too.
We're going to go to Freda Lindsay, a great story, a great example of a widow that kept on working, and God kept on working for her.
He was in the service and sitting behind me, and all of a sudden I noticed that some of the teachers were walking on the platform, and I thought, why are they coming up here? So I turned around and looked on my shoulder and over my shoulder, and there he was like this, just with his head on his shoulder, and was gone. The next morning I tried to get up out of bed, and I was so weak I just didn't feel I could, and And so I said, Carol, well, I call her Carol, that's what we call her. In Israel, they call her Shira, which means song.
Right.
You sing a carol. And so I said, Carol, I can't get out of bed this morning. This was the next day after Gordon died. And she said, Mom, let me help you. And she said, let's pray for enough strength just for one day, just for one day, today, just for today.
That is right.
And so the Lord helped me, and been going ever since.
Every day, and we were talking earlier, the first year, just the absolute worst.
Yes.
And yet God is a sustainer, and has every day, you're right, it's one foot in front of the other. And there are days that I know that I wanted just to pull the covers over my head and let the world just go past me. I don't care. But God always prompted me to keep on going. And I promised Zola that I would keep on going. And I know you probably, before Dr. Lindsay died, you probably made that talk also of the ministry goes on.
That's true. It has to.
It has to.
I'm sure that's kept you and me going, because there was this school to who was going to run it.
Right. That's right.
And then the next day after we had the funeral, why the board voted me as to so that I would succeed Gordon. And I thought, how in the world can I succeed him? And I remember sitting there and thinking, God, I can't write. Gordon's written 250 books. How can I write? How can I? He's written one book a month. I can't do that, Lord. And then all the other things I listed, and I said, he speaks all over the world. And Lord, I'm no great speaker. So that, and I listed a bunch of things, and I was telling this to the Lord privately. And then when I finished, it was like the Lord said, there's a few more things you can't do. I'll add those to the list. And
thanks so much for that.
Yeah. So, but anyway, the first year is the hardest. The first year they were going to have a Gordon Lindsay Day. So I made an announcement to the students. I said, now, a year has gone by. It's time to quit crying now. No more crying. And I said, now, what do you think the Lord's doing here on this Gordon Lindsay Day? They're probably having a Jubilee dance up there, you know. And so I don't want anybody crying on Gordon Lindsay Day. I want us to be happy that he's in a place he made it. What would be the greatest desire that you would have for any member of your family? Would be that they would make heaven.
That's right. How horrible would it be to think that your loved one died not knowing where they were going to go for their eternal life?
Absolutely true.
Wouldn't that be just the absolute worst?
Awful, awful.
So that is a comfort for me. It is a real comfort for me.
Yes, that they made it. That they made it.
I laugh and I always say Zola's talking to Jeremiah and King David, but he's also talking to Sammy Sneed and Bobby Jones and Byron Nelson, the golf greats. My husband loved to golf, so I'm sure.
Yes, mine did too.
They're having a great time.
Yes, it's so important that we keep our hearts full of the Word of God. And I, like I said, I have never seen anybody reading the Bible every day that goes deep into sin. It just doesn't happen.
It's not. What great stories of redemption, of man's redemption, of women's redemption, of our redemption, our salvation. What wonderful insight, what wonderful encouragement for us. I think the Bible is, whenever I have any questions, I go right to the source.
That's true. And the great women in the Bible.
Absolutely. Who's your favorite woman?
I love Hannah.
Do you really?
I do, Hannah.
Why?
Hannah, she was the neglected wife, in a sense. The other woman that bore all the children. She got the flowers and everything. And
so what advice would you give widows? What would you tell widows?
I would say, do what I did when I started Bible school, and this Baptist teacher said, read the Bible every day. 3 chapters, and I have our students go 3 chapters a day, 5 on Sunday. When I walked on the track, we have a track behind the student center, and I'd walk on the track, and I'd see our students coming around the track. They'd be exercising, and I'd go like this. And if they're doing it, they'd say, yeah.
3 chapters a day,
Yeah,
5 chapters on Sunday.
And if I'd say it,
Oh, if they weren't doing it.
they weren't doing it, and I'd say, gotcha.
Gotcha.
I got you this time. So anyway, it's very important that we form habits. You know, I have never met anybody that has told me that I read the Bible every day that has gone into sin. Now, maybe I missed 1 or 2, but I just haven't.
It's pretty convicting. God's Word's pretty convicting.
It is. I mean, you read it through, and there's places where you just better say, well, I think I'll skip today or something. You better not, though.
Well, God bless you. Thank you for talking with us. We'll talk to you later.
Bless you. Thank you for asking me to come.
Well, that's Freda Lindsay, and she's quite a woman, isn't she, Sandra?
She was a character, but she was so encouraging, Jeff. I really didn't know if I was going to make it. And here she's telling the story of her saying, I couldn't write, I'd never spoken. And I'm thinking, that was me, that was me. And she said, and God said, oh, and by the way, you can't do these things either. And I'm thinking, oh, gosh, that's me too. It was real encouraging. Life does go on. And I think that's the message that God has for all of us. Life does go on.
And we can all meet God in the future, by the way. It's never over till it's over, and we have a God who loves us. He cares for us and has a wonderful plan for our lives. Doesn't always feel that way, though, does it?
It doesn't. I really did not know what was going to happen to me. I didn't know, and God made all these plans, and here we are. I mean, I was really happy being Zola's wife. I was really happy being in the background and making sure that his pants and his shirt all matched. I was really happy doing that.
Yes.
But God has a sense of humor, is what I always say. He has a sense of humor. So
God is good.
God
Life
is
doesn't
wonderful.
always feel good, but life is good with God. We'll be back in a moment.
Shalom from Jerusalem. Actually, we're in the Garden of Gethsemane. We're looking at the olive trees, Jeff. Our people are behind. They're listening to our guide Zvi talk, and we're getting ready to do a Bible study.
And they are having a trip of a lifetime. If you feel the Lord beckoning you, and mysterious is the beckoning that has been drawing believers to this land for millennia, do join us, please, for a trip of a lifetime. Sandra and I know you'll be blessed.
For your free brochure on our next tour, call 1-800-WONDERS.
that was Zola's music. It was his Valentine's song to me. Every year on Valentine's, he would write me a song. We had a little joke. He would say, it's because I don't have to go out and buy anything. But I knew it really was.
That sounds like him, too.
He said, but I knew it was his heart. I knew that. And each song, every year, got different. He would say, it's because it's where our relationship is and where we are and who you are. It was really very, very touching. It was the last thing he wrote, and it was very special.
You know, the Bible, in some respects, is a love song to you, mankind, as well. And I would imagine that the story of God's love for widows is a tune as well that lightens a heavy heart. Having considered that sum in this program, let me remind where we began. We looked at a story initially in a drama about a woman who's pressed against the turbulence of trying times, but she is visited by the prophet Elijah. She herself continues sharing and caring, and then she discovers a God who hasn't abandoned her, though she felt that life circumstances had. And then beyond the drama, we considered a real-life drama. That is, in the story of Freda Lindsay, we see one who was herself caught between a rock and a hard place, and God delivered her. And then, of course, I'm sitting next to Sandra Levitt herself, who has her own anecdotal story here that's very close to home about Zola, who died a year ago, and our program carries his name and his memory. It's all tough. Life can get tough sometimes, but it's good news, I believe, when we consider that God visits those who find themselves pressed amidst the turbulence of trying times. And it may well be that there's someone within the sound of my voice that can relate to that personally. The good news is God hasn't changed, even though life circumstances can, and we can experience a God who saves us, can't we?
I cannot imagine having gone through this past year of widowhood not having God in my life. I can't imagine what women would do without God in their lives. It has made all the difference for me. I want you to join us next week. We're going to talk about Queen Esther. And as you go, Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
The Levitt Letter. This free publication includes Bible lessons, insightful news commentary, Hebrew lessons, and more. Call 1-800-WONDERS. That's 1-800-966-3377. Or write to Zola, Box 12268, Dallas, Texas 75225. You can also see our Levitt letters, TV programs, and national airing schedule at www.levitt.com. Please remember, Zola Levitt Ministries depends on tax-deductible donations from viewers like you. This has been a paid program brought to you by Zola Levitt Ministries.